Aged 80 in 1963. Photograph was taken by the local newspaper and he died shortly after, about 3 months after this photograph was taken. So that's just to introduce, just to know that the Irish connection with Everest goes right back to the very first expedition. And we provided the leader and I suppose the chief map maker that produced that famous map that they produced. Sorry, if you go back to, in Mullingar, if you go to the Greville Arms Hotel, you'll find a portrait of Howard Bury, and on the wall is a bison which he had shot on one of his shooting trips. So it's a very. I met Mary O'Rourke, the former minister, told me that she often went with her father to visit him in his house, and he was a very interesting man to talk to. And he brought back a pet bear from his bear, and he used to wrestle with the bear on the lawn of Belvedere House. So the bear was named Ague. So he's an interesting man. Anyway, my next connection with this whole process came when in 1987 Joss Lynham invited me to join him on an expedition there. And it's interesting, this photograph, you'll notice a few people, Dermot Summers, Mike Barry. Dermot, of course, was the first Irish person to climb all the great north faces in Europe, including the north face of the Oida. And Mike Barry has since become the first Irish person to walk to the South Pole. Seen, of course, a Tralee man. He was in the footsteps of none other than Tom Crean. And of course, my own, I very much, I came through the school of, I came through scouting, as somebody else mentioned earlier, and from scouting I got involved in rock climbing, and Sean Roddery, who was here earlier, I went on a mountaineering course in the quarry with Sean Roddery, and back in 1964 I think it was, and we graduated from that to the Alps, and after many seasons in the Alps I was invited by Joss to go. Joss got permission. I think Tibet was only opened up in 1984 to foreign mountaineers, and Joss got one of the early bookings to make an attempt on Changxi. I think it had only had 2 previous ascents before that, and we were. But this was the team. It was a sort of a motley crew of members of the Irish Mountaineering Club and other people that Joss knew that invited. This guy here is Phil Thomas. He was the chief instructor in Tiglin, which was then the National Adventure Centre, where people did mountain leadership training and canoe training and that. And we flew to Kathmandu, and we crossed over at Kadari. We crossed the bridge there, the famous bridge of Kadari, and we transferred onto a Chinese army lorry. And we were one of the very early groups to go into Tibet. And our protocol, we had actually paid for a lorry, a Chinese lorry, a bus and a jeep to have at our disposal. But somewhere along the lines, the jeep seemed to have fallen out of the equation, and we were driven almost straight up to Everest Base Camp without not having any much say in it. As a result, we didn't get a really good acclimatization. So this is us actually crossing the Friendship Highway on that expedition, looking out through the front screen of the Chinese Army lorry. And in the process of the next, when we arrived in Everest Base Camp, 2 or 3 of the guys were really sick, and within a couple of days, myself and Mike Barry had to piggyback one of our members who was really suffering, had acute mountain sickness. He was totally dizzy, and his eyes were totally bloodshot, and we knew he wouldn't last. We knew he'd die. And we literally, because we had no jeep, we had to piggyback him down. But when we came back, eventually we did the Chinese Army lorry. We were about 2 miles below the Roundup Monastery. Myself and Mike Barry piggybacking our friend, and the Chinese Army lorry was on its way back down, having dropped the load up. We managed to block the road and get this guy carried down into the valley, etc. And when we got back up, then myself and Phil Thomas, who didn't suffer from altitude as much as most people, we made very, very good progress. We went up, we climbed the Changchang Sila, which is the pass this side of, if you like, the the base camp side of Changsey, and when we got up there, there was just a howling gale. We couldn't put our tent up. There was such a narrow place to camp. So we came back down to our camp. We moved when the axe, the shot you saw with the axe, we moved an advanced base camp up into a lovely little meadow there. And then from there we went and we climbed onto the North Col. This is us, Dermot Summers took this picture, these couple of pictures here. We camped just below, we're right underneath the north face of Everest. And this is the ridge, you can see this is the ridge here coming down from Changsey that we were supposed to climb. But it was so active with rockfall and that it just wasn't, it was a death trap to climb. So we decided we would go up we'd climb the north. This is myself and Phil heading off. It took us 10 and a half hours from here to climb onto the North Col. And not too many people had actually climbed the North Col from this side at that time. And it was, you know, but we actually just took turns, zigzagged our way up this here onto the. Now the snow was quite soft, and it was quite often we were in. You know, it was really heavy going with very big rucksacks. We brought a pea pod tent, which is the sort of tent you wouldn't bring to a flat cow nowadays. It's a little tent without a ridge pole. And unfortunately, when we got up onto the col, the next day it started to snow very, very heavy. And of course, it didn't stop snowing. And the weight of the snow just kept pulling the two poles in. So, when we got up onto the col, this was what it looked like. And you can see here, that's where we pitched our tent. We come up this side. And it snowed all the next day, it snowed, and all the day after. So when we did manage to get out of the tent, we came down along the ridge here, and we noticed fixed ropes coming up from a previous expedition. So we decided we would go down that side, and knowing from our map there was obviously the other glacier was coming up, we thought we would reconnoitre Changsey from the other side on our way down. We went down with the fixed ropes lasted for about 400 metres, and then they ran out entirely. And then I was just belaying Phil on the rope, and he set off an avalanche, which just absolute huge avalanche. It just cleared the whole face underneath. And then the two of us were able to get safely down off that side, and we got down into Everest Advanced Base Camp on that side. And of course Doug Scott was in camp there with an international expedition, and we stayed the night with him, and it was a total education for us. We were on a first Irish Himalayan trip, I suppose, really, and just to see the way they were set up and how they were organised was a total education. And I had a notebook out, and I think I must have asked Doug Scott so many questions, but just on the food and the equipment and everything else, we had alpine experience, but we didn't have high altitude experience. A week later, we descended that glacier back to base camp, and a week later I came back up here, and this is actually the photograph from them. And Dermot Summers and Shay Nolan, who's a Dublin climber, and Phil Thomas and myself, we camped in that big tent. You saw the picture, we put that big tent up, and we came along. When they woke up in the morning, Dermot and Shay had these really rough headaches. They just didn't want to know altitude. They were completely knocked out. All they wanted to do was get down. And they did. They descended back the way they come up, leaving myself and Phil to head off. They're actually my footprints. I had 2 ski sticks, and I was planting my way up. And then Phil shouted at us. We were going up about halfway up the ridge. If you know, if you actually saw, there was lots of pictures of Changsey there. There's a horizontal, the ridge goes up very steep, and there's a horizontal apex ridge. And it's where that guy jumped off. That's exactly where I stopped. But the year I was there was so much snow that when I got onto that apex, it just began to crumble. But about halfway up here, Phil shouted up to me, he said, "Frank, my feet are freezing. I've no circulation." And he had, the year previous, he climbed the north face of the Matterhorn, and he had lost a toe, and he didn't want to lose any more toes. So he said, "I'm going back down, Frank." So at that point, it was still very goable, and the ridge didn't look like it was changing much. But as I went up higher and higher, the slope got steeper, and then one step was collapsing into the next until I reached this apex. And then when I stepped out on the apex, it was just, the whole thing was going to collapse underneath me. Well, I could see that if I could get across the apex, the rest of the mountain was very climbable. without a rope or without somebody to belay me, I had to make a decision to turn back. But I think at that moment, I stopped there with a camera and I took a whole series of photographs looking up the east-northeast ridge. This is the Mallory Ridge. And I knew at that moment I was coming back, but I wasn't coming back for Changsi. I knew I was coming back for Everest. And as it happened, I came back down to the tent and myself and Phil broke camp and we descended down that ridge there. And Joss was camped down near the lowland, and we went back to our base camp. There was too much fresh snow, so we decided to give it another week. Unfortunately, and we come back up again, and hopefully there'll be somebody who would be acclimatised that would be able to go with me. And when it turned out, it started to snow, and it didn't stop snowing. In fact, there's so much snow fell, the trucks couldn't come in to take us out, and we had to walk all the way out to the roadhead, 60 miles over the high pass, right down into the valley at Zangmu. And it was but I think at this moment, the Irish Everest Expedition 1993 was born. And on my way home on the plane, I wrote a 2-pager, which was really a proposal, a 2-expedition proposal, which was that we should get to round up our 12 most experienced alpinists. We should have an experience of one of the other great 8,000 metre peaks. And with that same team then we should go out a couple of years later and have an attempt on Everest. And I wrote that paper and I sent it to Dawson Selfox in Belfast. And he came down and met me at Joss's house. And we chose, it was interesting. When you go on an expedition, I learned a huge amount. The first big lesson I learned was the need for proper acclimatization, because so many of the team just didn't function because they weren't acclimatized. And I learned all about better food, need for all the climbers to have a proper climbing selection based on ability, motivation, skill levels. And then I also realised my own personal, I was just in my element up there. And of course we got great knowledge of insights into Nepalese and Chinese mountaineering regulations and customs and all of that. It was all so important. But when I met with Dawson, we went through all of the various 8,000 metre peaks and we chose Manaslu, largely because I hadn't had too many ascents, but also because it's totally in Nepal. And in order to get into it, we got the opportunity to do a Manaslu trek, which then wasn't commercially available. So we actually put together, we had a 14-day trek into the base camp, and it was unbelievable. You followed the Burri Gandaki River out of Gorkha village, and it was just, I think, 5 days of it. You're going through a single rhododendron forest. It's just an amazing place with people living in under great caverns, and it's just an amazing place. But we agreed anyway we would take this. So we formed a 2-expedition. We became joint leaders of the Irish Manaslu 1991 and the Irish Everest 1993 expedition. And I went to the Sports Council in the south, Dawson went to the Sports Council in the north. Low Alpine had a factory in Tullamore. They supplied us with all the mountaineering equipment. I think Musgraves Cash and Carry provided all the food, and we did the usual old thing, told T-shirts, held ballot sessions, pub quizzes, raised the money, and we got 11 climbers out on this is actually our trek. This is our trek out of, this is the stairs out of Gorkha village in 1991 on the Irish Manaslu expedition. It was an absolutely fantastic trek, and this is just, I have just one shot, but just so this is the Burri Gandaki River you see there in the background, and it's just unbelievable territory to walk through, and it was a great privilege. When we arrived at the village of Sama, we put up our tents, and our one expedition became 4 expeditions because various people decided that it was 1991. They wanted basically to do their own thing from base camp. Once they were there, the 3 groups paired themselves off. But myself, Dawson, Dermot Summers, Robbie Fenton, who of course is James' son, and Mike Barry. we decided to push in together. So we set off, and within a day, we got to the site of our first camp, and we had so much snowfall that you could sort of see about 4 foot of snow fell, and it did that every day for the next couple of weeks. It was midday, so we, as a group of 5, we resorted to snow holing. We built a snow hole instead of tents, and the other boys they didn't engage so much with the mountain. So we actually managed to establish a couple of more camps, and we got to about 6,200 meters at this is our high camp. This is Dermot Summers, Robbie Fenn, Mike Barry, myself and Dawson. And from here we made an attempt onto the summit of Mansu. And unfortunately there was just so much snow. We were up to our chests, and as the ground got steeper and steeper, it was totally avalanche prone, and it was just downright dangerous. We still had about 1,000 feet of climbing to do, and we were just up to, literally up to our chests, and we just knew like, there was no way. All we were going to do was dig a furrow which would avalanche us off the mountain. So we had to turn around and come back from that mountain. So when we came home, we reorganised ourselves into the Irish Everest expedition, and Dawson became leader and I became deputy leader, and a couple of new members joined the team. We had Tony Burke, Richard O'Neill Dean, and Nick Murphy. Nick Murphy's from West Cork, and he had been part of a group from Cork and Kerry who climbed Amadabla in '91, and Tony was Robbie's climbing partner, and Richard O'Neill Dean was now the chief instructor in Tiglin. But this was the group we went out to climb Everest with. We agreed a climatisation plan, which was one that we acclimatised in Nepal, and we went for a 7-day trek in the Langtang Himal, and then that making sure that we didn't repeat the mistakes of the Changxi expedition. And then from base camp we'd use yaks, and then from ABC we'd establish 3 camps, and you've seen this route up many times today. But I think what's different about our expedition is that we were doing this ourselves. We had one Sherpa on the mountain with us. I think nowadays it's impossible to climb the mountain the way we did because of the way mountaineering is organised. But we were very much in just before, I suppose, the sort of commercialisation of it happened. And then this was our basic plan before we went out. We were able to submit our plan to a chart with a graphic artist, and this was sent to all the schools in the country. And then they were able to tune into Pat Kenny show on Friday and follow us up Everest. And anyway, we went off, and this was a much happier expedition because we put a lot of work into team building before we left. And we packed up, and we were highly organised with the best of gear and equipment. And this is our Langtang Himal trek. This is the early part of it. I think some of our friends were here. And we crossed the Gozen Kun Pass and up along there, and we crossed the high pass at around 17. That's the height of Everest Base Camp. It was a 5,000 metre pass, and back down into the Gozen Kun, bus back to Kathmandu, and down to Kadari, and across the road into Everest Base Camp. And this is the last village of Chodong as you go up the Rongbuk Valley. And we organised it from the locals there, the local Tibetans, 40 yaks to arrive on the 4th of April. And we arrived in base camp on the 1st of April, which was a bit of an ominous thing for an Irish expedition to do. But this is the Rongbuk Monastery, and of course you can see Changxi and Everest in the background. And it's a fantastic site. I always remember the thrill and the excitement of the boys who hadn't been here before when they just turned that corner and suddenly you can just see Everest standing there about 20 miles away. And this was our base camp site, and we all had our own individual tents, and this was our Chinese interpreter, and the liaison officer, our camp kitchen, and the Irish Army had lent us a big marquee for the expedition. And then we weighed up our barrels for the axe and headed on went up the valley that was discovered by Edward Oliver Wheeler, and we followed that trail up the Rongbuk Glacier with the axe, and it was just terrific to be out there. This was like the first time an Irish expedition was on Everest, and it was great to be with fellas from West Cork and Roscommon and Tralee and Kerry and Belfast, and and 3 or 4 dubs, of course. And it was just terrific to be out there. It was like, from a sporting point of view, it's the same as, I suppose, wearing the Irish jersey and whether we were playing soccer or rugby or whatever. It was just fantastic. This is us going up the Rongbuk Glacier underneath Changxi, and this was our advanced base camp. We built these walls to protect the tent. There was about 40 mile an hour wind. You can see the mountain above. And this is another one of those pictures. This is us all set up in base camp, and the Irish Army had lent us another one of these marquees. And it was terrific to be there. And this is Tony and Nick Murphy just looking up when they arrived at the advanced base site, and looking at what was before us. And this is what they were looking at. And this is the way up to the North Col. And just to see, I saw pictures of the North Col today, the way up to it. This was what it was like. It was very, very steep. It was about 80 degrees that year, and it was really steep climb. I noticed, looking at the pictures, it seems to have leveled out somewhat, but it really was a severe climb. Yeah. And I'm sure it's changing all the time. But you can see there was a huge crevasse here, and another one just up there where we had to place a ladder at the very top. This was the sort of about 75 to 80 degrees off the horizontal, and then up onto the North Col, and it was just fantastic to be up there. This was the route I'd gone up onto Changxi. This is the ridge here, which I took the earlier photographs on, and we're now going up the other side. So there was a Chinese expedition there that year. We were there. These are their tents, and our tents are the one just beyond them. And we broke up. We worked in 2 teams of 4, and we established our next camp. This was our camp, our North Col camp there, just here. But our next camp was just above the just up there somewhere, on a little edge. And this is the way up to it. And it was very much like camped on just a big table with a fantastic drop. And we tried to put our next camp in place. Unfortunately, the weather, high winds come in, and we were 3 weeks. We actually got as far as 8,000 meters, but we didn't actually get to put the camps up. So there was a 3-week gap, in which case it was really about having patience. And somebody said the biggest thing you have to have on an expedition like this is the patience to wait until the conditions come right. And they did come right. We had a little window with about 10 days to go. We got a forecast saying that the monsoon had struck the Indian coast, but we had a 2-day window followed by a bad day, followed by maybe a day and a half. So we remade a plan that made it possible for 4 people to establish a high camp, and then 2 of those people to go to the summit, and then 2 more people to follow behind and have a second attempt. And in the process of the meetings, it was decided that Dawson and myself would make that first ascent. And this was our picture in base camp. John Murray, who's a RTE for camera, and this is one of his great photographs of Everest Base Camp in '93 with a full moon in place. And this is myself and Dawson. This was the 7th time on this expedition we climbed onto the North Col. Just if people say about going up and down, but we didn't have the camps all in place. We didn't employ somebody else to put. We put all the tents in place ourselves. So it was very much a hard work job. And this is us. Eventually, this is myself, Dawson. This is my photograph of Dawson. This is our Sherpa Kunka here. and this is Mike Barry, and we put up the tent. When we arrived, the tent that was previously there being blown away, and the only thing that was sitting, the ground sheet was still stuck to the ground, but the only thing that was there was one of our pair of oxygen cylinders were just sitting on top of the thing, but everything else was blown away. So the next day was a bad day, so we had to just lie in those tents and howling winds, and then the next day was a good day. Mike Barry dropped back down to the North Col, and myself and Dawson and Kunka set off, and Kunka carried his load to 8,200 metres, and he descended, and myself and Dawson carried, but this is now getting very high on the mountain, looking down on top of Changxi, and you can now see the two glaciers, and it was just fantastic to be suddenly up there. We noticed a gully system coming down from the ridge in the direction we wanted to go. So Kunka had dropped the bag down here somewhere, but we went the extra couple of 100 metres to get to the bottom of this ridge. So when we woke in the morning, we just had to get into that gully and climb to the top. And we set off early in the next morning, but it took us with two little ice axes a long time to chop out a level horizontal ledge for the tent, and then this is the two of us up there, totally on our own. There was nobody on the mountain for 2 weeks, and when we set out the following morning, this is first light, it's about 9 in the morning, and this is our first view. You can already see the summit of Everest up there. Well, we had come up this place. This is the first step, then there's the second step, and people are calling this is the third step, I suppose. But about halfway up there, we decided we wouldn't rope up. We had a 60 feet of 6mm Kevlar, so we just got into our rhythm. The two of us got out, and we were both very comfortable on this terrain, and we just I would kick off about 200 steps, step to one side, then Dawson would take over. And then when we got to the rocks, we had the dust. There was so much snow. The weather had been bad for weeks. You saw earlier pictures of the mountain. It was totally rocky. We had the mountain in almost completely snow, and we had to dust the rock off the holes as we climbed it. And it was really tough going, but we got up onto the ridge here, and this is now just getting into. These are some old fixed ropes from other expeditions, and we worked our way up, and we're now. Well, this is coming around the first step into where the second step is. At this stage, my first bottle of oxygen run out is now my second bottle, and when I come round into the pass here, it's fantastic. We're now above the Kangshung face, about 4,000 foot drop down. You're looking into Nepal on this side, and we're going along the ridge, and we sit down and take stock, and I suddenly realised that Dawson's suit is no longer as pink and yellow as it looked and whatever, and I'm realising I'm having to stretch my feet, and so I've actually realised my second bottle of oxygen has expired, and we calculated we were maybe 2-3 hours from the top, and he was still on his first bottle of oxygen and he had a full bottle. So rather than me delay him, it was 1:30 in the day, I just said, look Dawson, you go. Everybody on this team has worked for, it'd be just an awful shame. I'm not going to hold you up. You go and get there, and I'll get myself down safely. And you don't be worrying about me, I'll get myself down. So we parted here. So this is now a very famous picture of Dawson. This is, I suppose, the only, because he took some selfies, of course, on the top. But this is I suppose, my picture of Dawson as he approached the second step in 1993. And when he came to the second step, of course, this ladder, which had been put there by the Chinese in 1975, Dawson came to, he climbed up the ladder. It was only held by a sling on one side, and when he got up, it actually came out off the wall, so he had to actually lean in to keep the ladder in place. And when he got up, somebody said you have to step to one side. I remember him telling me it was really dodgy getting off the ladder, and then up onto that, and then that was his view. He went up the rocks here, stayed on the rocks. He wanted to keep away from the soft stuff. And at 4:45 on the 27th of May in 1993, Dawson Stelfox became the first Irishman to reach the summit of Mount Everest. And on the walkie-talkie, he said he felt he was just pushed up there by this terrific pyramid of support that came from everyone that made it possible for him to be standing up there. And I was still beating my way down, but I saw two figures coming up. I was above our tent, I could see where our tent was, and it was Robbie Fenton and Tony Burke, and they were giving me a big thumbs up, which I took, because I hadn't got a radio, which I took to mean that Dawson was up. And when I met them about an hour later, they had brought up a tent and they pitched a tent beside ours, and their intention was to make a second attempt the next day. So they went up to with their headlights, because it was now getting dark, to help Dawson find his way down. And I got there stoked. We made a big brew. And, anyway, at 4 in the morning the next day, they set off, but they're only gone an hour, and it started to snow, and it just before long they were in a total whiteout, and our footsteps, which they were following, were now being obliterated, and they decided that in those conditions they weren't going to make the summit, so they came back. And the four of us, we had a brew, and then we just decided, let's get ourselves off this mountain safe. And we spent the next day just getting down those camps together, walking away. We stopped at the Camp 2 site, made another brew, hydrated ourselves, and we got ourselves safely down onto the North Col. And I remember myself, Dawson and Robbie, we decided we'd keep going, even though it was pitch black. We had been up and down those ropes so many times, there was no problem to go down with a headlamp. Well, rather than stop and just get seized up in the tent up there, I prefer to go down. I wanted to have a lie on in advanced base camp. And we got down there. But Tony Burke decided to stay up on the North Col. So we got down to our tents. And of course, first thing in the morning, the yaks arrived to take us out. And the yak bells were ringing. And then the guys were shaking us to get up out of the tent. Our tent was the only tent that had to be taken down to load up the yaks. And anyway, we climbed out reluctantly, and we had all packed up, ready to go. The only thing that was missing was Tony Burke. And we couldn't raise him on the radio, the batteries were flat.